changing color temperature, brightness, as well as color on indoor lights with a smart light system. In my case, I have the Meross smart lights connected to smart things. So this is a review of the Meross MSL 120. So this is what the box looks like. It says smart Wi-Fi LED bulb. It has 60 watts and 9 watts LED. So it is a 60 watt replacement, but it has 9 watts. This is then what one light bulb looks like, and now I will demonstrate what it can do. First of all, I turn the whole studio to red. Now I turn it to circadian lighting, which, because it is already dark outside, is now just kind of a standard evening, very yellowish tone. And then I can also change the brightness by going onto one lighting group, and then I can turn the brightness up as well as down. But sometimes it also doesn't work, just like right now. This is what it looks like in Samsung Smart Things, and it does not do anything because sometimes the system is very latent. So I actually just tried to pause, but it didn't work. An outline of this video. First of all, I will explain why I got this. Second of all, I will explain then the Meross MSL 120, and then I will explain the integration with Samsung Smart Things, as well as why I decided basically to try to mirror the outside sun on the inside, and also maybe discuss some connections to Andrew Huberman. So first of all, why did I get this? I have listened to Andrew Huberman for quite some time, and I figured that I could automate basically my own biological rhythm to a certain extent, and basically to optimize it further, to standardize it further, and to basically optimize my alertness periods, and also try to optimize my sleep by basically trying to mirror the outside sun on the inside. Now, one could very simply, not very simply, but simplified, maybe create these 3 different buckets now of light. So basically 3 dimensions of light. The first would be brightness, the second one would be color temperature, and the third one would be light. Now in terms of the, not light, but the color. Now in terms of color, the outside sun seems to be sometimes, so it is basically white, but then it changes kind of to this bluish and yellowish tones, mostly I think due to atmospheric reflections or something along these lines. Once I had decided to try to pursue such a system, it's not so much that I decided, it is just that the lights actually that previously came with the soft boxes I had kind of went out of business after quite some years, and so I had to replace them anyway. So now I could go to the grocery store and get the normal lights, or I could basically spend a lot more and try to make this circadian lighting system a reality. Back then I didn't know that Samsung Smart Things actually already offered a circadian lighting option, which then I only discovered on the way. So first of all, I figured I would just adjust the intensity. So in the morning I maybe would have it very bright to kind of match the alertness and to also match the outside sun. And then once the afternoon hours and the evening kind of arrives, I would change the color temperature then manually to more and more yellowish tones, and also the color intensity, so the brightness, to basically less and less and less, such that basically at the end of the day, just by the signal of the light, my body already would be basically already able to sleep. Once I had decided to try to pursue such a system, I then set basically up a test. And this test was that I ordered the first one of these. I researched on Amazon quite a little bit because, well, if you order these lights and then it turns out that something doesn't work, then you can send them back. And a short disclaimer, even though in sometimes in conversation one says, okay, it only took me 20 minutes or it was like 5 minutes setting it up. This was a project that took multiple days to set it up, mostly because I had issues with the Wi-Fi. So I live in an apartment complex and the Wi-Fi is provided by the apartment complex company, and so, or actually outsourced to an external company. And so the short story is now that these lights do work within the Meross app. So this company also has now an app, which one can also see on the side here. In this app, one can basically set this lighting bulb or light bulb up with Wi-Fi Direct, which is like Wi-Fi, but it is a direct connection between the light bulb and, in this case, either the hub or the phone. I don't know if the phone also has Wi-Fi Direct or can communicate with this. What I also have to mention at this point already is that I also have a smart hub from basically Samsung, which is not exactly from Samsung, but it is kind of labeled as Smart Things Hub for Samsung, which is made by the company IoTech, which I think also made the hubs for Samsung prior, and now Samsung again made a hub, which is not a full SmartThings hub, but it's just a very small one with less functions. I don't know about the strategy here, but I had to get this hub, and now it kind of works, at least sometimes, as you saw with the brightness adjustment. So first of all, I ordered one of these boxes, and so I had 4 lights, which I then basically installed in the ceiling here, which is the main light for my apartment. Now, I then basically created a couple of lighting groups. So once you have set up one bulb, you can create a lighting group. So now let's maybe take a little bit of a look into the app. So within the app, this is SmartThings now and not the Meross app. One could also basically adjust a few lights here and there in the Meross app, but I just used the Meross app in order to basically set up the devices. And then one can set up the SmartThings account or the Samsung account and import basically all the bulbs. The problem though is that sometimes a light loses its connection. Then one has to basically reconnect it to the Meross app and then also remember the login details for the Meross account and then set up the bulb, ideally with the same name, because if one sets it up with the same name again in Meross, then the connection seems to somehow magically again work, whereas if one sets it up with another name, then SmartThings doesn't recognize the lamp, basically the newly set up lamp, as the old one any longer. So now within the SmartThings app, one can basically set favorites, which I now have done. I have one group for the ceiling, and I have basically a couple of groups for the other lights, which are mostly the studio lights. And I then have one light in the back of my studio, which, not in the back of my studio, behind my screens, to basically illuminate the back of my screens and to provide a lighting for basically working at night. Now, there are also the devices, and so first of all there is the home. These are actually the favorites. The other ones were already the devices. And so I have created a couple of lighting situations. For example, red light. I find myself rarely using these because in everyday situations, I just switch on light and I switch it off. And then I just don't bother opening up the app because, well, why wait for this app to load if I also can just press the button and turn on the light? This is actually, it turns out quite useful invention. So now if I have this blue light on and it's the evening, then this kind of disrupts my circadian rhythm already. There is also an option for green light, and I just set up these different lights to try basically these different lights. Now what also has to be mentioned is that I am recording on a phone, and this automatically adjusts the lighting temperature. So let's say I adjust it to 6K, which is normally rather white or bluish light, then after quite some time the phone now has adjusted. Whereas if I again switch to circadian, initially it looks a little bit more yellowish, but then the phone as well as the eyes also adjust, and so again it looks like the same. Within the Samsung SmartThings app, one has also a couple of other devices. So I do have a Galaxy Watch 6 at this point in time. I had a Watch 4 before, and I also have 2 Galaxy tags. Now what I'm using the Galaxy tags for is for basically 3 functions. So one can double press, one can press once, and one can long press on these. The once press is basically turning on the light, and it's turning on the light but also circadian, mostly because I switched these off also with the normal energy switch. So there are basically 2 switches now for these lights. The first one is the software switch. So software switches can be activated by using my smartwatch, by using the Galaxy tags, as long as they are connected to the phone and as long as the phone is then connected to the hub. But sometimes it also works with the hub maybe not connected. I'm not entirely sure about this. But I think usually the hub needs to be connected. Maybe sometimes it works without it, but well. So what I have set up now is basically this one press turns on the light and also to circadian. The brightness is not adjusted because the brightness is in my case automated. So in the morning, the brightness is basically set to its fullest. Now, I also experimented with basically being woken up by light, but this means that I have to wake up on the minute, because otherwise, and so this actually then also wakes me up. This is also something I had in mind for quite some time, that what if instead of using an alarm, which after 3 days I already hate, I could just turn on the light, and so therefore I don't have to listen to something. And this actually worked quite well, and it actually worked so well that at least on my Samsung Galaxy Active 4 watch, I had sleep scores for quite some time, at least also in the winter, in the beginning of the year, of ranging from 80 to almost maybe the 90s, sometimes 95. Maybe I had once also a 96 or something like this. I do also wear a Garmin watch, and on this watch usually the sleep scores are a little bit worse, and so, but also but also on there I had quite high sleep scores, and for this routine I also used the lighting here. So in the last 10 minutes of the day I usually have it set to red, and one could also gradually set it more reddish and reddish and reddish, but so much about the color temperature. Now, actually not so much, because I didn't discuss the circadian function yet. So Samsung SmartThings does have an option within basically a routine. One can set the lamp to turn on, one can set it to turn off, and within one of these routines, let's just say, okay, this is the circadian routine. This is the one I turn on and off, but so basically I turn the light on and off, and it also sets to circadian lighting. Now, basically I can choose for the actions what it does. I can turn it on, I can turn it off, I can brighten it gradually and also dim it gradually. So one can set maybe 30 minutes, and then in the 30 minutes it basically dims gradually. The problem though with dimming gradually is that it doesn't marginally adjust, but it adjusts kind of every couple of seconds, and then it's like okay, now it's a little bit darker and now a little bit darker. So I found this rather unpleasant. What it also now just happened is that the automatic turning off set in, so I have kind of multiple triggers. I also tried this once with my notebook. So in Windows Tasks, not in Windows Tasks, there is a certain program where you can basically shut down the notebook at a certain point of the day, and this was kind of one of the more extreme sleep optimization methods I did try. So I can override, as you just saw, by just pressing the button once. I can just turn on the light, but nonetheless I have these automations still set up, because they at least should remind me of kind of the ideal sleep schedule I set up, even though practically it seems to not work very well. Now, what also is there is the option for circadian lighting. Circadian lighting, what this does now, is it sets the color temperature, just the color temperature, not the brightness, to the color temperature of the outside sun. And when it works, it actually looks like the inside light, also because I have set it up with soft boxes, is almost coming from the outside. And because the light looks almost identical, of course now the light from outside is usually brighter, but on cloudy days often it looks like there is just an additional sun, not a sun, but a light source that looks like the sun's light. And so this has been quite useful. Now, Andrew Huberman also recommended on his podcast, I saw this once, he recommended smart bulbs. And these smart bulbs now had circadian lighting. Now, little probably do most people know that with very comparably cheap smart bulbs, so this is also not cheap. Compared to a normal light bulb, this is still quite expensive. So if I break down the price, I paid 48 euros for one box of these, and in total I bought 4 boxes of these because I have 16 light bulbs. And if one breaks down the price, it's 12 euros per bulb, which is still a couple of times more compared to a normal light bulb, which maybe would have cost me 2 to 4 or 5 euros for one, but now I pay 12. I don't know how long they last, but what I do know now is that this works to a certain extent, at least. And it seems to, this is now a very reduced approach, a very simplified approach. But if I, in the middle of the day, let's say, or in the middle of my circadian day, if I look at very yellowish light, then it makes me feel kind of as if I'm off. And not off, but not off in a on or off way, but off in a okay, this is not right way. And the same is true for if it's late in the evening and it's still, the color temperature would be 6K, for example, so very bluish. This will also just not feel right. And after quite some time, you actually begin to feel like agitated and you don't really know what it is. But then once I set this up, it was like, okay, this is the solution. It is so obviously the solution that the lighting temperature should be matched to basically the outside sun. And during basically the whole night, it is set to, well, as you are seeing now, this somewhat yellowish. The color. In theory, I could adjust the color, as you saw, to red, to green, to blue. And in theory, I could also use this. Let's say I need another maybe 2 hours of quite intensive work. I could actually now set the brightness to maximum and also set it to totally blue light, which probably would activate me to a certain extent. But similarly with caffeine, what I'm actually doing is I'm de-optimizing my circadian rhythm. So I'm basically, to a certain extent, one could say, similar with caffeine, I'm taking resources from future me for present now, which in the long-term view is probably not a good idea. So for this reason, I decided to basically not touch the color optimization at all. And so I just rarely find myself basically using these functions. What I have is white plus the color temperature that is matched to the outside sun, plus the brightness optimization. So this is now the third component, the brightness optimization. What I have now done and of course, there are so many facets to this. The first one is that in many countries on this planet, the winter schedule, which is circadian aligned, one could say, so the winter schedule is the original schedule. So at 12 at noon, it is actually noon. But in summer then, if it's 12 winter noon, it's actually already 1 p.m. So what this means now, if basically all these devices are, if I say, okay, 1 o'clock, something happens throughout the year in Samsung SmartThings, then 1 o'clock is different in summer versus winter. And this now not only has potential problems in terms of circadian optimization, but also now in terms of setting these lights up. What this practically means, or rather a practical example of this now, is that if I set at 5, so what I have set up is a couple of routines that basically for the full hour set the brightness, reduce the brightness by a certain portion. What I have set up, I experimented with various habits, and not habits but routines. So what I've experimented with is to say, okay, the last 8 hours of the day I reduce the brightness by 10% each hour until it basically goes out. A problem now with this approach is that what if you need to search for something at night? Then what I found myself often is manually adjusting the brightness of the light, which I then had to match, and it also takes quite some time to open up the app, and also on the watch it's just not there. I want a button. If I want a button, I would have to purchase multiple Galaxy tags and set different routines to all of these, but they also cost like 25 euros or 30 euros per Galaxy tag, so I only have two. And I just don't find myself basically opening up the SmartThings app because it takes several seconds to load. I do have a Galaxy S10, which is now 5 years old, but there seems to be no point in now getting a new phone just for basically SmartThings. And also just light switches are really, really quick. So I do have basically the software light switch, which is a Galaxy tag, and if I long press, then the light turns off. If I then once press it, again, the light turns on, and this is now all of the light, including basically the studio light. Now, additionally, I have switches for basically all of these boxes, so there is one switch for all of the studio light, and there is one switch, which is basically next to my apartment entry door, which is then turning on and off the ceiling light. So what I can do now is basically, if I go out, or let's say I'm leaving for a couple of days for holidays, to be entirely sure that the light is also turned off, to preserve energy, I just turn off the hardware switches, but of course this takes time. But if I have set up all of these automations to maybe also wake me up in the morning, but I want to sleep in or something like this, then the only way I can make sure is to make sure that the light doesn't wake me up, because it went out the night before, and then I assumed, okay, it's already out, and I just went to bed, and then it turns on in the morning, but it turns out that I didn't want to adhere to the schedule, or my body didn't want to. Then I need to basically turn manually off, currently in total 3 switches. I also have the bathroom lighting, which currently is not circadian, is not a circadian lighting. I thought about maybe getting also something and replacing it, but since I live in a furnished apartment, I just didn't at this point in time. I try to, in the evening, avoid basically turning it on, because it usually seems to disrupt my circadian rhythm and kind of wake me up in the late hours of the night, such that I then have trouble sleeping. So maybe a couple of additional details to the box itself. I mean, in the box you just find the bulb itself, and also a couple of different codes, and this is now, there is also an instruction manual, but there are also these codes on there, and I don't necessarily want to show them all. So this is what it looks like. There are these trays in which then the smart bulbs are in. In terms of what it works with, I probably already showed this. In terms of the technical specifications, it is called the MSL 120, and there are a couple of different requirements which probably you don't really care about, but nonetheless I can actually show it into the camera in case you are interested. Now, in addition, there is actually no code on the outside, I just realized, and so I also have now this here, which says that it works with, in my case, SmartThings. Then it also works with Hey Google, Siri, and then it also works with Amazon Alexa. And actually, they also work with HomeKit, which is basically added. Probably it was added after they were already manufactured, or I don't know. HomeKit does have a few additional codes which are also on the devices, which one can then also set up, I guess, with HomeKit. But I don't have HomeKit since I am basically on Windows and Android. And so this has been a summary of an introduction to kind of circadian lighting optimization. What I often now also think is that if there is a particularly cloudy day. Of course, this is not as bright. Now the question is, how bright is this actually? I measured this a couple of times, but I can't remember the values. Andrew Huberman on his podcast and also in a video actually mentioned a few times an app which is called Light Meter, and I installed this app and then I checked out how much light actually is coming from above. Additionally, now I have a way, so I do know that on the Apple Watches there already exists basically a light tracking feature, but on the Galaxy Watch this doesn't exist, and also on my Garmin Fenix there is no such thing. What there is though is the solar ring on my Fenix, and I've used this solar ring. Now, of course, there are many caveats to this. The first one is only a ring. The second one, it's basically covering a certain portion of my wrist, whereas most light exposure is probably, the most effect of the light exposure is probably because it hits the eyes, maybe also to some extent the skin, but mostly it's probably the eyes. So if I'm wearing this, if it is covered by my sleeve, then, not by my sleeve, but by my sleeve, then this is only an approximation. For this reason, probably also Garmin doesn't sell it as light intensity or something like this, but it tells it basically it says it is, or it calls it solar intensity. Now solar intensity is now available, and for example, if I go on a summer day outside for a hike for a couple of hours, then I might hit 20k lux hours. If I'm on a cloudy day, only out maybe a couple of minutes and the rest of the day inside, then inside here, basically the solar intensity barely registers any light, even if I have it turned up to the fullest. So this does not compare to outside light, but then the color temperature to a certain extent, probably at least, guides my lighting system on the inside, my circadian clock, that is basically deriving information from at least the color temperature portion. And because I've also set up the lighting, so the brightness to a certain extent, is guiding basically myself through the day, and is kind of mirroring what is happening on the outside, even if I don't make it like 3 hours a day to the outside, because I'm mostly working in here. One question is left: can you synchronize it to music? I do know that with the Philips Hue light bulbs, which are kind of which were the kind of first light bulbs of this category, but now why would I buy the Philips Hue if they are just more expensive, and they also so I bought these mostly because they are cheaper. Now there is no option that I know of with SmartThings or Meross that you could synchronize basically the light to the music, and also, as you saw, the latency is just a little bit too big for this. Probably, maybe there is a mode in the future in which this will work, but currently it does not. So now finally I can screw this back in and then maybe go to sleep, as throughout the video my mind already did.